I still remember the smell of that morning. Fresh coffee, rain on the window, the kind of ordinary morning you don't know you'll remember for the rest of your life. My name is Maya, and before I tell you what happened to me, I need you to understand something. I was not a woman who looked for trouble. I was not a woman who raised her voice. I was the woman who smiled first, forgave first, trusted first. That is exactly why she thought I would never find out. That is exactly why she thought that even if I did find out, I would stay silent. She was wrong. And this is the story of how wrong she was. Let me take you back, not to the day everything broke, but to the years before it, the years when I still believed that loyalty was something everyone valued the way I did. I grew up in a small town, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone's business, where kindness was currency, and where my mother always told me, Maya, be good to people, and people will be good to you. I believed her. For 32 years, I believed her completely. I met Ria when we were 19 years old, sitting next to each other in a college lecture hall, both of us late, both of us out of breath, both of us laughing about it before the professor even started talking. From that day, we were inseparable. She became the sister I never had. When my father passed away in my second year of college, it was Ria who sat with me through the night, who held my hand at the funeral, who never once made me feel alone. I trusted her with everything. My fears, my dreams, my secrets. Years later, I met Arjun. He was kind, at least in the beginning. He worked in finance, had a calm voice, and made me feel safe in a way I hadn't felt since my father died. We got married when I was 27. Ria was my maid of honor. She cried more than I did at the wedding. I remember thinking, I am the luckiest woman alive. A husband who loves me. A best friend who is like blood. If only I had known then what I know now. 2 years into my marriage, I had an idea. A small idea, at first, a home styling and interior design service for young couples moving into their first apartments. I had always loved design, always had an eye for making small spaces feel like home. I started taking on a few clients on weekends, just for fun, just for a little extra income. Ria was the one who pushed me to take it seriously. Maya, you have a gift, she told me one evening, sitting on my living room floor surrounded by fabric samples and paint swatches. You could build something real out of this, and I want to help you build it. I should tell you, Ria was brilliant with numbers, with business strategy, with all the things I was not good at. I had the vision. She had the structure. It felt like fate. Two friends, complementary skills, building something together. We called it Nest, a design studio for people starting new chapters of their lives. I put in my savings. She put in her business knowledge and connections. We agreed 50-50, equal partners, equal ownership, equal trust. For the first 2 years, it was everything I dreamed it could be. We worked 18-hour days sometimes, laughing through exhaustion, celebrating every new client with cheap wine and expensive takeout. Nest grew from 3 clients to 30, from a spare room in my apartment to an actual studio space downtown. Local magazines started writing about us. We were, by every measure, succeeding. And through all of it, my husband Arjun watched from the sidelines. He never seemed particularly interested in the business, which I told myself was normal because finance and design were different worlds. He came to a few events, smiled for a few photos, told me he was proud of me, though something in the way he said it always felt just slightly rehearsed. I never dwelled on it. I had no reason to. I had my best friend beside me and my husband behind me. What more could a woman ask for? But here is something I have learned since then, something I want you to remember as this story unfolds. The people who smile the widest in your successes are not always the people who are happiest for you. Sometimes, they are simply watching, waiting, calculating what your success could mean for them. I did not know that yet. Not on that rainy morning with the coffee and the calm. That calm would not last much longer. Because 3 years into building Nest together, small things started to shift. Nothing dramatic. Nothing you could point to and say, there. That's the moment it started. Just small things. A meeting I wasn't told about. A client who mentioned a conversation with Ria that I had never heard about. A late-night text on Arjun's phone that he closed just a little too quickly when I walked into the room. Small things. The kind of things a trusting woman explains away. I explained every single one of them away. I told myself Ria was just handling logistics, so I didn't have to worry about them. I told myself Arjun was just texting a colleague about work. I told myself that after everything Ria and I had been through, After 10 years of friendship, after she held my hand at my father's funeral, after she cried at my wedding, there was no version of the world where she would ever hurt me. I want you to sit with that thought for a moment, because I think many of you watching this have felt it too. That quiet refusal to see what is right in front of you, simply because the person standing there means too much to lose. I was about to learn just how much I stood to lose. And I was about to learn that the two people I trusted most in this world had been building something behind my back, something that had nothing to do with home design and everything to do with taking apart the life I had built, piece by piece, while I was too busy trusting them to notice. If you have ever trusted someone completely, a friend, a partner, a family member, and later found out that trust was the very weapon they used against you, I want you to stay with me through this story. Because what happened next changed everything I believed about loyalty, about silence, and about what a quiet woman is capable of when she finally decides enough is enough. This is not just a story about betrayal. This is a story about what happens when the person everyone underestimates stops being quiet. Let's begin. Looking back now, I can see the cracks so clearly. But at the time, each one seemed so small, so easy to forgive, that I never once imagined they were pieces of something much bigger. It started with the client meetings. Nest had grown to the point where Rhea and I could no longer attend every single meeting together. We divided the workload. I handled the creative direction. She handled contracts, budgets, and vendor relationships. It made sense. It was efficient. And for a long time, it worked beautifully. But one afternoon, I ran into one of our biggest clients, a woman named Priya Kapoor, at a coffee shop near the studio. She was warm, friendly, and mentioned, casually, without any idea of what she was revealing, that she was looking forward to the new studio launch Rhea had told her about. I remember smiling and nodding, the way you do when you don't want to seem confused in front of a client. But inside, my stomach had already dropped. New studio launch. I had heard nothing about a new studio launch. That night, I asked Rhea about it, keeping my voice light, casual. Priya mentioned something about a new studio launch. What's that about? Rhea barely looked up from her laptop. Oh, that. I've just been exploring some ideas for expansion. Nothing solid yet. Didn't want to bring it to you until I had real numbers. It sounded reasonable. It sounded like exactly the kind of thing a good business partner would say. So I let it go. But a few weeks later, there was another moment. And then another. A vendor mentioned a meeting I wasn't invited to. A financial report that took longer than usual to reach me. A new hire I found out about only after they had already started working. Each time, Rhea had an explanation. Each time, the explanation made sense on its own. It was only when you put them all together, which I did not do, not then, that a much darker picture would have started to form. Meanwhile, at home, things were shifting too, though I told myself it was simply the stress of my growing business. Arjun had started working later hours. He said the finance department was going through a merger, that the workload had tripled, that he was sorry he couldn't be around as much. I understood. I was working late hours myself. We had become two ships passing in the night, both convinced the other understood, both too tired to ask deeper questions. There was one night, though, that I think about constantly now. It was almost midnight, and I had just gotten out of the shower when I heard Arjun's phone buzz on the nightstand. Without thinking twice, the way you glance at any notification, I looked at the screen. It was a message from Rhea. Don't forget, dinner Thursday. Usual place. Don't tell Maya yet. I want it to be a surprise for her birthday. My birthday was 3 months away. I remember reading that message twice, feeling a strange, uncomfortable flutter in my chest, and then, because I trusted them both so completely, convincing myself it was exactly what it said. A surprise. Something sweet. My husband and my best friend planning something kind for me, months in advance that I did not mention it to Arjun. I did not want to ruin whatever surprise they were planning. I want you to understand something about trust, because I think it's important for this story. Trust is not stupidity. Trust is not weakness. When you have known someone for 10 years, when they have shown up for you in your darkest moments, your mind does not go to betrayal first. It goes to the version of them you have always known. And so every strange moment gets folded neatly into that old, familiar picture, instead of being allowed to stand on its own and raise the alarm it should have raised. That is exactly what happened to me. Again and again. A few months later, Nest hosted its biggest event yet, the launch of a partnership with a well-known furniture brand, something Ria and I had worked toward for over a year. The event was a triumph. Press coverage, new clients, congratulations pouring in from every direction. I stood on that small stage that night, thanking our team, thanking our clients, thanking Ria by name for being the backbone of everything we had built. She hugged me tightly after my speech. I remember her whispering into my ear, "We did this together, Maya. Always together." I believed her completely. That same week, I discovered, quite by accident, going through old financial folders for our accountant, a series of wire transfers to an account I did not recognize. Not massive amounts. Small, steady withdrawals, spread out over almost a year, always just under the threshold that would trigger an automatic flag in our accounting software. I brought it to Ria immediately, expecting a simple explanation, the way every previous concern had been resolved. "Oh, that's the new vendor account for the expansion," she said smoothly. "I told you I was exploring options. I didn't want to bother you with the details until things were confirmed." Once again, it made sense. Once again, I let it go. I share all of this with you not because I want you to think I was foolish. I share it because I want you to understand exactly how betrayal works when it is done well. It does not arrive all at once, in one dramatic, undeniable moment. It arrives in small, reasonable pieces, each one easy to accept on its own. Each one designed, whether consciously or not, to keep you from ever seeing the full picture until it is far too late to stop what is already in motion. By the time I found out the truth, the real, complete, devastating truth, Ria and Arjun had already been planning for months, maybe longer, and I had unknowingly helped them, trusting every explanation, dismissing every doubt, defending them both to my own instincts, over and over again. The woman who smiled first, forgave first, trusted first. She was about to learn the cost of trusting too completely. And the truth, when it finally came, did not arrive gently. It arrived like a wave that knocks the breath out of you before you even see it coming. I will never forget the night I found out everything. Every detail of that evening is burned into my memory. The sound of the rain outside, the flicker of the kitchen light, the way my hands shook so badly I could barely hold my phone. That night is where our story truly begins. It was a Thursday. I remember because Thursdays had become her night. The night Ria and Arjun had their supposed birthday planning dinners. The dinners I was so careful never to mention, so as not to ruin the surprise they were preparing for me. I had left the studio early that evening. A client had canceled, and for the first time in weeks, I found myself with a free evening. I thought about surprising Arjun, bringing food to wherever he was working late, spending a quiet hour with my husband the way we used to. It felt like a small, sweet idea. The kind of thing a wife does when she still believes in her marriage. I called his office. His assistant told me, politely, that Arjun had left hours ago. I told myself there was an explanation. There always was. I drove toward home, and somewhere along the way, I found myself pulling into the parking lot of a small restaurant on the edge of town, the kind of quiet, dimly lit place you'd choose if you didn't want to be seen. I don't fully know why I went there. Perhaps some part of me, some part one had been silencing for months, already knew. Through the window, I saw them, Arjun and Ria, sitting across from each other, his hand over hers on the table. Not the handhold of two people planning a surprise party. Not the closeness of a husband and a best friend catching up. This was something else entirely, something intimate, something practiced, something that had clearly happened many times before. I sat in my car for what felt like an hour, though it was probably only minutes, watching the two people I trusted most in this world laugh together, lean into each other, share a life that was supposed to be mine. I did not walk in. I did not confront them. Something in me, some instinct I didn't fully understand at the time, told me that walking in there and making a scene would only give them the chance to explain it away, the way they had explained away every small doubt before this one. I had believed their explanations for months. I was not going to let them build one more. Instead, I drove home in silence, my hands steady on the wheel in a way that surprised even me. I did not cry that night. The tears would come later, in waves I could not control. But that first night, I felt something colder settle into place, a clarity I had never experienced before. I understood, with total certainty, that the two people I trusted most in this world had been lying to me for a very long time. That night, I did not sleep. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop, And I began to look, really look, at everything I had dismissed over the past year. The wire transfers, the meetings I wasn't invited to, the new studio launch Priya Kapoor had mentioned, the late nights, the closed messages, the birthday dinner that was 3 months too early. Piece by piece, the picture assembled itself in front of me, and it was so much worse than I had imagined. I spent the next several days quietly gathering everything I could. I am not, by nature, a deceptive person, but desperation and heartbreak teach you skills you never thought you'd need. I created a separate email account. I began saving screenshots. I requested copies of Nest's full financial records from our accountant, framing it as a routine audit for tax purposes. I reviewed every wire transfer with fresh eyes, and this time, I did not stop at the first explanation. What I found made my stomach turn. The new vendor account Ria had mentioned was not a vendor account at all. It was a private account, registered under a business name I did not recognize, a name that, after some digging, I discovered was a design studio Ria had quietly registered 8 months earlier. Same city, similar branding, and a growing list of clients that, when I cross-referenced the names, were almost entirely former Nest clients. Clients Ria had been slowly, carefully guiding away from our shared company and into her own. She was not building an expansion. She was building a replacement. And she was using our clients, our reputation, and, I would later discover, a significant portion of our shared company's funds to do it. The surprise birthday dinners were not birthday dinners at all. As I searched through old messages, hotel booking confirmations, and calendar entries I had never been meant to see, I pieced together a timeline that stretched back almost 2 years. 2 years of dinners. 2 years of hotel stays disguised as business trips. 2 years of my husband and my best friend building a relationship in the shadow of everything I believed was mine that I was not going to scream. I was not going to confront them in a fit of rage, the way every instinct in my body wanted me to. I was not going to give either of them the satisfaction of watching me fall apart. I was going to do something far more dangerous. I was going to smile. I was going to nod. I was going to continue showing up at Nest every day, continue sitting across from my husband at dinner every night, continue being exactly the trusting, quiet woman they believed I still was. And underneath that calm surface, I was going to build a plan that would take back everything they thought they had already taken from me. If you have ever discovered a betrayal so deep it changed the shape of who you thought your life was, you understand exactly what that moment feels like. The world tilting, the ground disappearing, and yet somehow, your mind finding a strange, steady focus in the middle of the chaos. That focus would carry me through the next 6 months. And what I did with it, neither of them saw coming. The hardest thing I have ever done in my life was not discovering the betrayal. It was living with it in silence, day after day, while pretending nothing had changed. Every morning, I woke up beside a man who had been lying to me for 2 years, and I made him coffee the way I always had. Every day, I walked into a studio built with my best friend, and I sat across from her in meetings, discussing paint colors and client budgets, while knowing she had spent 8 months quietly building a business on the bones of the one we shared. I want to tell you honestly, there were nights I sat in my car outside my own house, unable to go inside, unable to face another evening of pretending. There were mornings I stared at Ria across the studio table and had to remind myself to breathe normally, to keep my voice light, to keep my hands from shaking. Grief, I learned, does not wait politely for a convenient time. It comes for you in the middle of a client meeting. It comes for you while you're cooking dinner for the husband who betrayed you. It comes for you at 2 in the morning, when the house is quiet and there is no one left to distract you from the truth. But I did not let it stop me, because somewhere in the middle of all that pain, I made a decision that changed everything. I was not going to be a woman who fell apart quietly and disappeared. I was going to be a woman who used her pain as fuel. The first thing I did was protect myself legally, without either of them knowing. I met privately with a lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Farah who specialized in business disputes and had, coincidentally, handled a case almost identical to mine 2 years earlier. I told her everything. The wire transfers, the competing business, the affair, all of it. Farah's advice was simple, and it became the foundation of everything I did next. Do not confront them yet, she told me. The moment you show your hand, they will either destroy the evidence or twist the story to protect themselves. Right now, you have something far more powerful than anger. You have the element of surprise. Use it. So I did. Over the following weeks, I quietly built a case. I obtained copies of Nest's founding contract, which, thankfully, and I say thankfully because I had insisted on it years earlier despite Riya's mild objections, clearly stated that any client work, branding, or business relationships developed under the Nest name belonged to the company, not to any individual partner. This meant that the competing studio Riya had built, using our clients and our reputation, was not just a betrayal. It was, legally, theft. I also began speaking, carefully and casually, with a few people I trusted completely. People who had no connection to Riya or Arjun. People whose loyalty I had never once had to question. My cousin Naveen, who worked in corporate investigations, helped me understand exactly how to trace the money without raising suspicion. My old college friend Sonia, who now worked in public relations, quietly explained to me how reputations were built and destroyed in our industry, and what it would take to make sure the truth, when it finally came out, would be impossible to hide from or spin. I found strength I did not know I had. Every conversation I had with these trusted few reminded me that I was not as alone as Riya and Arjun believed me to be. They had spent 2 years assuming that because I trusted easily, I would always be easy to deceive. What they did not understand was that the same open heart that made me trust so completely also made me fiercely loyal to the people who had never betrayed me. And those people, when I finally needed them, showed up without hesitation. Meanwhile, at home and at the studio, I played my role perfectly. I laughed at Riya's jokes. I asked Arjun about his day. I let them believe, completely, that their secret was still safe. There was one afternoon, about 2 months into my quiet investigation, when Riya asked me, almost casually, while we were reviewing a client contract, whether everything was okay. "You've seemed a little distant lately, Maya. Is everything all right?" I remember looking at her, this woman who had held my hand at my father's funeral, who had built a secret business on the back of everything we created together, who had spent 2 years sharing dinners and hotel rooms with my husband, and I said, calmly, "I'm fine, just tired. You know how it is, running a business is exhausting." She smiled, relieved, and moved on to the next topic. I want you to sit with that moment for a second, because I think it says everything about what betrayal teaches you. The people who deceive you the most completely are often the ones who cannot imagine being deceived themselves. Riya never once suspected that the quiet, trusting friend she had underestimated for 2 years was, in that very moment, holding evidence that would end everything she had built. By the 4th month of my quiet investigation, I had assembled a case so complete that Farah told me, plainly, "Maya, you don't just have a strong case. You have an undeniable one." I had documentation of the diverted clients. I had financial records showing exactly how much money had been funneled out of Nest and into Riya's competing studio. I had, through careful, legal means, with Farah's guidance every step of the way, confirmation of the affair, though I want to be clear, this was never the center of my plan. My revenge was never going to be about punishing 2 people for falling into each other's arms. It was going to be about protecting the business I had built with my own hands, reclaiming my name, and making absolutely certain that neither of them could ever again mistake my kindness for weakness. I was ready. I had the evidence. I had the legal ground. I had trusted allies standing quietly behind me. Now, all I needed was the right moment. And that moment, I decided, would not be quiet. It would not be a private confrontation behind closed doors, easily denied, easily reframed. Riya and Arjun had spent 2 years building their new life in the shadows, confident that I would never see the light shining directly on them. I was going to make sure that when the truth finally came out, there would be no shadows left for either of them to hide in. There is a particular kind of quiet that settles over you when you know something big is coming, but no one around you does. It is not peace. It is not calm, exactly. It is more like standing at the edge of a very tall building, looking down, knowing exactly when you are going to jump, and simply waiting for the right second. I lived in that quiet for weeks. Farah and I met again, this time to finalize exactly how the truth would come out. She explained something to me that I have never forgotten. "Maya, there is a difference between revenge that destroys you and revenge that restores you. The first is about making them feel pain. The second is about making sure the truth is finally seen, and letting the truth do the work for you." I decided, in that meeting, exactly what kind of revenge I wanted. I did not want to scream at Riya in front of our staff. I did not want to throw Arjun's belongings onto the street while the neighbors watched, satisfying as that image might have felt in my angriest moments. I wanted something far more powerful. I wanted the truth, clean, documented, undeniable, to be placed in front of everyone who mattered at exactly the moment when Riya and Arjun believed they were the safest. That moment, I decided, would be the second anniversary celebration of Nest. It was, in a strange and almost painful way, the perfect setting. Nest's second anniversary event had already been planned for months. A large gathering of clients, press, vendors, and industry partners, celebrating everything the company had achieved. Riya had been especially excited about this event, more excited than I had seen her in a long time, and I understood why. She had quietly informed a few select clients. In private conversations I now had documented proof of, that she would soon be expanding into her own venture, clearly planning to use the anniversary event as the final, glamorous send-off before her true intentions became public on her own terms. She thought she would control the story. I decided I would control it instead. Over the next 6 weeks, every piece came together. Farah prepared formal legal documentation, proof of the diverted funds, proof of the competing business built with stolen client relationships, all clearly showing a violation of the very contract Riya herself had signed 4 years earlier. Naveen helped me trace every transaction back to its source, creating a financial timeline so precise that even Riya's own accountant, when eventually shown the records, would have no way to argue against it. Sonia helped me understand exactly how to present the truth in a way that would be immediately, unmistakably clear to every single person in that room, clients, press, and industry partners alike, without a single moment of ambiguity. Riya could later spin in her favor. And through all of this, I continued smiling at Riya every morning. I continued sitting across from Arjun every evening, asking about his day, listening to him complain about work stress that I now understood was, at least partially, the exhaustion of maintaining 2 lives at once. There is something I want to say here, something I think matters deeply. During those 6 weeks, I was not living in hatred. I want to be honest with you about that. Yes, there was anger. Anger so deep it sometimes made it hard to breathe. But underneath the anger, there was something else growing too, a strange, quiet strength. A sense that I was not simply reacting to what had been done to me. I was reclaiming something. My name, my work, my sense of self-worth, which had been slowly eroded over 2 years of small lies I had talked myself into believing. I began seeing a therapist during this period, a decision I am deeply grateful for. Her name was Dr. Iyer, and in our very first session, she said something that stayed with me through everything that followed. Maya, revenge that comes from hatred will eventually hollow you out. But justice that comes from self-respect will build you back up. Make sure you know which one you're building toward. I thought about that constantly in the weeks leading up to the anniversary event. And I came to understand that what I wanted was not simply to hurt Riya and Arjun the way they had hurt me. What I wanted was for the truth to finally exist in the open, where it could no longer be denied, minimized, or quietly rewritten. I wanted the people who had built their new lives on lies to finally have to stand in the light of exactly what they had done. 3 days before the anniversary event, Riya invited me to lunch. One of the rare moments in those final weeks where it was just the 2 of us, away from the studio, away from Arjun. I remember she seemed unusually reflective that day, almost sentimental. "Can you believe it's been 4 years since we started this?" she said, swirling the ice in her drink. "We built something real, Maya. Whatever happens next, I hope you know how proud I am of what we created together." I looked at her, this woman who had spent 2 years quietly dismantling everything we built while telling me, to my face, how proud she was of it. And I felt something settle firmly into place inside me. Any lingering doubt, any small hope that there had been some misunderstanding, any part of me that still wanted to believe the best about her, disappeared completely in that moment. We did build something real, I told her, and I meant every word, though not in the way she understood it. And I don't think either of us is going to forget what happened here. She smiled, misunderstanding me completely, the way she had misunderstood me for 2 years. 3 days later, everything would change. 3 days later, the woman who thought I would stay silent forever was about to find out exactly how wrong she had been. The night of Nest's second anniversary arrived exactly the way every event we had ever hosted together arrived. Bright lights, soft music, a room full of clients and press and vendors in their finest clothes, glasses of champagne catching the light. Ria had outdone herself with the decor, and in any other circumstance, I would have been proud to stand beside her, admiring what we had built. Instead, I stood at the edge of that beautifully decorated room, watching my husband and my best friend move through the crowd, greeting guests, accepting compliments, playing the roles they had perfected over the last 2 years, and I felt the strange, electric calm of a woman who knows exactly what is about to happen. Farah was there, seated quietly near the back, dressed elegantly enough to blend in completely with the crowd. No one would have guessed she was a lawyer, holding a folder of documents that would end 2 lives as they currently existed. Sonia stood near the small stage we had set up for speeches, discreetly coordinating with the event's audiovisual team. Naveen sat near the entrance, simply there, the way you want a person you trust completely to be there on the most important night of your life. Ria took the stage first, exactly as we had planned months earlier, before I knew what I now knew. She thanked our clients, our team, our vendors. She spoke about vision, about growth, about the future, and I watched her carefully choose her words in a way that, now that I understood the truth, sounded almost like a farewell speech disguised as a celebration. Then it was my turn. I walked onto that small stage in the dress I had chosen carefully for this exact moment, and I looked out at a room full of people who had trusted Nest, trusted Ria, trusted me, for 4 years. I thought about my father, about my mother's words, "Be good to people, and people will be good to you," and I understood, standing there, that those words were not wrong. They were simply incomplete. Being good to people does not mean allowing them to take everything from you without consequence. I began my speech the way I had planned. I thanked our clients for their trust. I thanked our team for their hard work. And then, calmly, without raising my voice, without a single tremor I had not already practiced away in front of my mirror at home, I said something I had rehearsed for weeks. 4 years ago, Ria and I built this company on one simple promise to each other: complete honesty, complete partnership, complete trust. Tonight, I think it's important that promise is honored fully, in front of the people who have trusted us with their homes, their businesses, and their belief in what we built. I watched Ria's smile falter, just slightly, though she likely told herself it was nothing. Over the past several months, I continued, I discovered that a significant portion of the trust this company was built on had been broken. Client relationships that belonged to Nest were quietly redirected to a competing business. Company funds were diverted without authorization. And the partner I trusted most in this world spent nearly a year building a replacement for everything we created together, while telling me, to my face, how proud she was of what we had built. The room had gone completely silent. I could see Ria's face change in real time, confusion shifting rapidly into panic as she realized this was not a misunderstanding she could smooth over with one of her easy, practiced explanations. I did not raise my voice. I did not point fingers dramatically or dissolve into tears, though every part of my body wanted to do both. I simply nodded toward Farah, who stood and, with quiet professionalism, began providing the documentation to a select group of our most senior clients and business partners who had been discreetly informed, just that morning, that something important would be shared with them tonight. Sonia, at the same time, ensured that the truth reached the press in a controlled, accurate, undeniable way, not through gossip or speculation, but through clean, documented fact, exactly the way Farah and I had planned. There would be no room for Ria to later claim she had been misunderstood or unfairly targeted, or the victim of some jealous overreaction. Arjun, standing near the back of the room, had gone completely pale. I remember locking eyes with him for just a moment, and in that moment, I did not feel the devastation I had expected to feel. I felt something closer to release. 2 years of small lies, late nights, and quiet dismissals, all of it collapsing, finally, into a truth too large and too well documented to explain away. Ria tried, briefly, to speak, to offer some version of the explanations that had worked so many times before. But this time, there was no small piece of doubt for her words to hide behind. This time, every fact was already laid out clearly, undeniably, in front of exactly the people whose trust she needed most to survive in this industry. I finished my speech the way I had planned, my voice steady even as my heart pounded harder than it ever had in my life. Nest was built on trust. Tonight, that trust has been restored, not because nothing went wrong, but because the truth, finally, is standing where it belongs. In the light, I stepped off that stage to a silence so heavy you could feel it pressing against the walls of the room. And then, slowly, something happened that I had not fully anticipated. Client after client, person after person who had trusted Nest with their homes and their businesses began approaching me, not with judgment, but with quiet, genuine respect. They had seen, in real time, exactly the kind of woman I was, someone who, even in the middle of profound betrayal, had chosen truth and dignity over chaos and destruction. Ria left the event that night without a single client's trust intact. Within weeks, her competing studio, built on stolen relationships and diverted funds, would collapse entirely, unable to survive once the truth was public and the legal consequences of breaching her partnership contract began to unfold. Arjun and I did not speak again that night. There was nothing left, in that moment, that needed to be said out loud. Everything that needed to be understood had already been understood by everyone in that room. The woman who thought I would stay silent forever had just watched, in front of everyone who mattered to her career and her new life, exactly how wrong she had been. But the story does not end there. Because truth, once spoken, has consequences that unfold long after the room goes quiet. And what happened in the months that followed would change everything, for all three of us, in ways none of us fully expected. The days after the anniversary event felt like living inside a storm that had already passed, but left its wreckage scattered everywhere. My phone did not stop ringing. Clients calling to check in, to offer support, some even a little shaken by how close they had come to unknowingly following Ria into a business built on stolen foundations. Journalists reaching out for comment, though Sonia handled most of those calls, ensuring the story remained factual, dignified, and free of the kind of sensationalism that could have turned my quiet, careful truth into a tabloid spectacle. Ria, predictably, tried several approaches in the weeks that followed. First came the phone calls, long, tearful voicemails insisting I had misunderstood, that things were not as simple as they seemed, that our friendship deserved a conversation before I let a business dispute end 10 years of history. I did not return those calls. Farah had been clear from the beginning. Any communication now needed to happen through legal channels, not late-night voicemails designed to reopen a door I had already, carefully, closed. Then came the legal response. Ria's lawyers attempted to argue that the client relationships she had taken were built on her personal reputation, not Nest's brand. A claim that fell apart almost immediately once the founding contract, the one I had insisted on years earlier, was placed in front of a judge. The contract was unambiguous. Every client relationship developed under the Nest name belonged to the company. Every dollar diverted without authorization was, legally and unquestionably, theft from a business she was still, at the time, a 50% partner in. The case settled out of court within 4 months. Ria was required to pay back a significant portion of the diverted funds, and the competing studio she had built was legally barred from working with any former Nest client for a period of 3 years. It was not, perhaps, the dramatic courtroom reckoning some part of me had once imagined in my angriest moments. But it was thorough, it was fair, and most importantly, it was undeniable, a clean, documented conclusion that no amount of charm or explanation could ever rewrite. Professionally, Ria's reputation never recovered in our city's design industry. Word travels quickly among people who work closely together for years, and once the documented truth became known, few clients or vendors were willing to risk their own reputations by associating with hers. I want to be honest with you. There is no triumphant satisfaction in watching someone's career collapse, even someone who deeply hurt you. What I felt, mostly, was a quiet, sad kind of closure. The friend I had loved for 10 years was gone, and in her place was simply the truth of who she had chosen to become. Arjun and I separated within weeks of the anniversary event. There was no dramatic confrontation, no screaming match, no final explosive fight. By the time the truth came out publicly, there was simply nothing left between us worth fighting to save. We finalized our divorce quietly, 6 months later. He moved to another city. I heard, through mutual acquaintances, that his relationship with Rhea did not survive the fallout either, which, I confess, did not surprise me. Relationships built on a foundation of betrayal rarely have the strength to withstand the weight of what comes after. I want to pause here and speak directly to anyone watching this who has experienced something similar. The particular grief of losing not just a marriage, but a marriage and a friendship at the exact same time by the exact same betrayal. It is a specific kind of pain that is difficult to explain to people who have not lived through it. You are not simply mourning a relationship. You are mourning your own understanding of the last several years of your life. You are asking yourself, over and over, which memories were real and which were simply performances you were never meant to see through. I do not have a perfect answer for that grief. I do not think there is one. What I can tell you is that it does, slowly, become lighter, not because the betrayal stops mattering, but because you begin building a life large enough that the betrayal is no longer the biggest thing in it. Nest, remarkably, survived. In fact, in the months following the public reveal, our business grew faster than it ever had before. Clients told me, again and again, that watching how I had handled such a profound betrayal, with dignity, with evidence, with calm resolve rather than public chaos, had only deepened their trust in me as someone they wanted to work with. I hired a new business partner 8 months later, a sharp, honest woman named Kavita who had, coincidentally, once been a client of ours and had watched the entire anniversary event unfold in person. I knew, the moment you stood on that stage and didn't fall apart, she told me during our first partnership meeting, that you were exactly the kind of person I wanted to build something with. I share all of this with you not to suggest that my story wrapped up perfectly, with every loose and neatly resolved. Life is rarely that tidy. There were nights, even a full year after the anniversary event, when I still cried over the friendship I had lost, over the marriage I had believed in so completely. Healing is not a straight line. It moves forward and backward and sideways, often all in the same week. But there is something I want you to understand, something I learned through every painful step of this experience. The version of me who discovered that betrayal in a rainy parking lot was not weak for trusting so completely. And the version of me who stood on that stage, calm and steady, delivering the truth without ever raising her voice, was not cruel for finally letting that truth be seen. She was simply, finally, done being silent. There is a particular quiet that follows a storm, not the quiet of before, when you didn't know what was coming, but a different kind of quiet. The kind that comes after everything has already happened, when there is nothing left to brace for, and all that remains is the slow, patient work of putting your life back together. The year after my divorce was, without question, the hardest year of my life. Not because of any single dramatic moment, but because of all the small, ordinary moments that betrayal quietly steals from you. Coming home to an apartment that echoed differently than the house I used to share. Learning to make decisions, even small ones, like where to go for dinner or which movie to watch, without automatically considering someone else's preferences first. Rebuilding a sense of who I was outside of being someone's wife, someone's best friend, someone's business partner. I leaned heavily on the people who had shown up for me during the hardest months of my investigation. Farah, who became a genuine friend rather than simply a lawyer I once hired. Naveen, my cousin, who checked in on me every single week without fail, even during months when I had nothing new to report except that I was, simply, still standing. Sonia, who reminded me constantly that surviving something does not mean you owe the world a triumphant, camera-ready recovery, that it is enough, some days, to just get through the day. I also want to tell you about a woman named Leela, someone I met almost by accident during this period, at a small business networking event I almost didn't attend. Leela ran a nonprofit that supported women rebuilding their careers after difficult life transitions, divorce, business betrayals, personal loss. When she heard a shortened version of my story, she asked if I would be willing to speak, someday, to a small group of women going through something similar. I said yes, though I remember feeling terrified at the idea of standing in front of strangers and revisiting the most painful chapter of my life out loud, on purpose, without the armor of legal documentation and prepared speeches that had carried me through the anniversary event. That first talk, 6 months after my divorce was finalized, was one of the most meaningful experiences of my life. I stood in front of a room of maybe 20 women, all carrying different versions of the same wound. A business partner who had cheated them, a spouse who had betrayed them, a friend who had turned out to be someone else entirely. And as I spoke, I watched something remarkable happen. Women who had been sitting with their arms crossed, guarded, unsure why they'd even come, slowly began nodding. Some began crying, quietly. Afterward, several came up to me, not to talk about my story specifically, but to share their own stories they told me, again and again, they had never said out loud to anyone. I began speaking at Leela's events regularly after that. Not because I saw myself as some kind of expert on betrayal or revenge. I want to be clear, I do not believe there is one correct way to survive what I survived. Some women choose to walk away quietly, without confrontation, and that is just as valid a path as the one I chose. Others choose forgiveness, genuine forgiveness, and rebuild relationships that I would never have been able to rebuild myself. There is no single right answer. What I began to understand, through those conversations, was that the most important thing is simply this: choosing a response you can live with. A response that lets you look at yourself in the mirror, years later, and feel proud of how you handled the worst moment of your life. Professionally, Nest continued to grow. Kavita, my new business partner, brought a kind of steady, grounded energy to the company that I hadn't realized I needed until I had it. We expanded to a second city 18 months after the anniversary event, and for the first time since everything happened, I found myself genuinely excited about the future of the business, rather than simply surviving each day within it. Personally, healing came in smaller, quieter ways than I expected. I started taking a pottery class on Sunday mornings, something I had wanted to do for years but had never made time for. I reconnected with old college friends I had drifted from during the busiest years of building Nest. I traveled alone for the first time in my life. A 2-week trip to the mountains that I had once dreamed of taking with Arjun, and which I ended up taking entirely by myself, feeling more at peace during those 2 weeks than I had felt in years. I want to be honest about something, because I think it matters. I did not, in the end, feel triumphant hatred toward Riya or Arjun. What I felt, as the months passed, was something closer to a strange, hard-won peace. Not because what they did was acceptable, it was not, and I do not believe it ever will be. But because I understood, finally, that carrying anger toward them indefinitely would only continue giving them power over my life, long after they had any right to it. I let go, not because they deserved forgiveness, but because I deserved peace. There is a difference between those two things, and I think it is one of the most important lessons this entire experience taught me. By the time 2 years had passed since that anniversary event, I had built a life I was genuinely, deeply proud of. Not a life free of scars. I don't think any of us ever fully outrun the scars of a betrayal that deep. But a life where those scars had become part of my story, rather than the center of it. And that, more than any courtroom victory or collapsed competing business, felt like the real revenge. Not destroying the people who hurt me, but building a life so full, so honest, and so entirely my own that their betrayal became simply one chapter in a much longer, much better story. If you have stayed with me through this entire story, I want to thank you, not just for listening, but for allowing me to share something that took me years to fully understand myself. I think about that rainy morning at the beginning of this story often. The coffee, the quiet, the version of me who still believed that loyalty was simply something you gave freely and received in equal measure. I do not think that version of me was foolish. I think she was simply someone who had not yet learned a lesson that life, eventually, teaches almost everyone in one form or another. That trust, no matter how carefully placed, is never a guarantee. It is a gift. And like any gift, some people will treasure it, and others will quietly take it apart for their own purposes. But here is what I want you to understand most of all, because I think it is the true heart of this story. Being betrayed does not mean you were foolish for trusting. It means someone else failed to honor something you gave them honestly and completely. The failure belongs to them, not to you. For a long time after everything happened, I struggled with a quiet, nagging shame. The sense that I should have seen it coming sooner, that a smarter woman, a more suspicious woman, would have caught the signs months earlier than I did. I want to gently push back against that instinct. both for myself and for anyone watching this who has felt the same thing about their own story. Trusting people completely is not a weakness. It is, in many ways, one of the most generous things a person can do. The problem is never trust itself. The problem is only ever the people who take that trust and use it as a weapon instead of honoring it as a gift. I also want to speak directly to the idea of revenge, because I think it is easy, when hearing a story like this, to focus only on the satisfaction of the moment everything came out into the open. That moment was important. It mattered deeply, both practically and emotionally. But if I am honest with you, the deepest revenge was never that speech on that stage. The deepest revenge was everything that came after. It was rebuilding a business that grew stronger without the person who tried to steal it out from under me. It was standing in front of rooms full of other women, helping them find their own strength in the aftermath of their own betrayals. It was learning to travel alone, to laugh freely again, to trust new people carefully but without permanent fear. It was becoming, slowly and deliberately, a version of myself that Riya and Arjun's betrayal could never have predicted and could certainly never take credit for. If someone in your life has betrayed you, a friend, a partner, a family member, someone you trusted with everything, I want you to hear this clearly. Silence is not the same as weakness, and patience is not the same as surrender. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is exactly what I did. Stay calm. Gather the truth. Protect yourself, quietly and completely, before you ever show your hand. And when the moment finally comes to speak that truth, speak it clearly, speak it with evidence, and speak it with a steadiness that leaves no room for anyone to rewrite your story for you. But I also want to say this, because I believe it matters just as much. However you choose to respond to your own betrayal, whether it looks like mine or looks completely different, the goal is never really about the other person at all. It is about you. It is about being able to look at your own reflection years later and recognize someone you are proud of. Someone who faced the worst thing that ever happened to them and chose truth over chaos, dignity over destruction, and ultimately, peace over permanent anger. My mother once told me, "Be good to people, and people will be good to you." I understand now that she was not entirely right and not entirely wrong either. Not everyone will honor the goodness you offer them. Some people, like Riya and Arjun, will take that goodness and use it against you in ways you never could have imagined. But here is the piece my mother's advice was missing, the piece I had to learn entirely on my own. Being good to people is not a guarantee about how they will treat you. It is a reflection of who you choose to be, regardless of how they treat you. And in the end, that choice, who you decide to be in the face of betrayal, is the only thing that was ever truly yours to control. She thought I would stay silent forever. I had other plans. And if you are living through your own version of this story right now, if someone you trusted has broken that trust in ways that feel impossible to fully process, I hope you remember this. Your silence, if you choose it, does not have to be surrender. It can be preparation. And when you are finally ready to speak your truth, speak it the way I did. Calmly, completely, undeniably. Because the people who underestimate quiet, trusting women are always, eventually, the ones most surprised by exactly how strong those women turn out to be. Thank you for listening to my story. If it meant something to you, I hope you carry a piece of it with you. Not the anger, but the strength. Not the betrayal, but everything I built after it. Because in the end, that is the only revenge that ever truly lasts. Sometimes, late in the evening, when the studio has emptied out and it's just me, Kavita, and the quiet hum of the city outside, I think back to that rainy morning at the very beginning of this story. The coffee, the calm, the version of me who had no idea what was coming. I do not regret trusting Riya for as long as I did. I do not regret loving Arjun the way I loved him, fully and without holding back. I have made peace with the fact that some chapters of our lives end not because we did something wrong, but simply because the people we shared them with were not who we believed them to be. Nest celebrated its 7th anniversary last month. We now work with clients in 3 cities. Kavita and I built something honest, something steady, something that grew not despite what happened, but in many ways, because of the strength I found in surviving it. I heard, not long ago, through the small, quiet channels that news like this always travels, that Riya had moved to another city and started over in a different field entirely, far from the design world that once meant everything to her. I felt no satisfaction hearing that. Only a quiet, distant sense of closure. The final page of a chapter one had long since finished reading. As for me, I am no longer the woman who sat in her car outside a small restaurant, watching her whole world quietly rearrange itself through a window. I am someone new now, someone shaped by that pain, but never defined by it. If you take one thing from this story, let it be this. The people who hurt you do not get to write the ending. Only you do. And I promise you, the ending you write for yourself, on the other side of betrayal, can be more beautiful than anything you lost.